Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel and today we will discuss situation in Ukraine on the 12th of June. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And today we are going to start with our Slavyansk Bridgehead. A few days ago I told you that the battle for Slavyansk has started, and that happened mainly because of the fact that the Russians managed to cross Severodonetsk river in this area. They crossed the river near the town by the name of Svetogorsk, this town. They established control over the Bridgehead in Tatianovka. A few days later, they established control over the town Bridgehead. A few days later, we found out that the Russians started their offensive operation towards Sidorova, and there were very heavy clashes around this town. The Ukrainians are still keeping some positions in this area. They keep a lot of positions in this area, and I'm sure that they're going to defend themselves in this area for long time. At least they will try to do this, but the Russians are offending and are taking town by town, not very fast. But if we compare this period with the same period like months ago, we must say that the Russians have increased their speed, and now they're taking towns much more faster than they did this even months ago. Because if you remember, months ago it was like a big situation, big announcement if the Russians managed to take another town. But today we see that they're pushing very fast, and I see that the Ukrainians they're not very good in their defense, or maybe it's some kind of a plan to allow Russians to push as far as possible. So we'll see, we'll follow this situation. Maybe the Ukrainians by themselves want to start some Slavyansk defense operation. Because, for example, I'm not sure if there is any need, or if it's like smart to keep the Ukrainian forces in these small towns. Maybe because the Russians are covering this area with heavy bombs and artillery, and of course the losses of the Ukrainians in these towns are very high, because mainly this is small villages. So that's why maybe the Ukrainians are moving back. So I can't tell you exactly what's going on there. The only fact is that the Russians are taking town and the Ukrainians are moving towards Slavyansk. So maybe they want to start the battle, because we know and we understand that the battles for such big cities like Slavyansk, Mariupol always bring a lot of losses for the offensive side. So, and I must say that Slavyansk is much more fortified than Severodonetsk or Mariupol. This is like a very big fortress in this area, and even if the Russians are able to establish control over Slavyansk, we understand that then they need to move towards Kramatorsk, and Kramatorsk is the same Slavyansk, maybe twice as fortified than this area. So it will be a very long trip for the Russians in this area. So we'll see what's going to be next, but for now let's try to understand the current situation in this area. As I told you, the Russians managed to establish control over a few towns in this area. First of all, they established control over Tatianovka. As I told you, they did this like a few days ago. After that, they established control over Bridgehead. As far as you can see, the Russian source map has been updated, and they're showing like a small bridgehead in this area, right in this back bit. And today we got some, few days ago, I told you that the Russians started their offensive operations towards Sidorova. Furthermore, I told you that the Russians established control over this town. Yesterday, there were no updates about this area. Furthermore, some Russian sources announced that the Russians were pushed from this town. But this evening, we got the final confirmation that Sidorova is under the Russians. Furthermore, Bogorodichne is also under the Russians. So we can say that the Russians established a very big bridgehead right on this side of the Severodonetsk river. So, and this is not very good for the Ukrainians for many reasons. And first of all is that from Izum bridgehead, this is our Izum bridgehead, very big, huge army are moving towards Slavyansk. It's like the Russian army number 20 and 35, and they're moving, and the only one barrier on their way from Izum bridgehead towards Slavyansk is these two small villages like Dolina and Krasnopolye, and another village I found, another village, Mazanivka. So these three villages is the only one barrier on the way on the Russians' way towards Slavyansk. So let's take a look at this map from point of view of the area control, and let's try to determine what is the next Russian steps in this area. So this is the area and this is the current situation. One more time, the Russians established controls Dovginke. So the area, as you can see, that is marked as red color but with the blue border, means that according to the West sources map, this area is still under the Ukrainian control, but according to the Russian sources, this area is already under their control, and they managed to establish control during this week. Dovginke is under the Russians. Bogorodichne, they established control this morning. Tatyanovka, Prishep, they established control a few days ago. Sidorova, the final control, they established this morning. All these areas, like on this bulk of Severodonetsk river, is under the Russians. It's like there is the town Shurova, and the territory with the yellow color is the territory under the Ukrainians' control. And if we take a look at the west sides, it's Mazanevka, Dolina, Krasnopolye, these three towns, three villages under the Ukrainians. This Sherwood forest, this part of this forest is under the Ukrainians. Mayaki, Adamivka, Mykolskaya, Khristishe is under the Ukrainians. Of course, Donetsk, Raigorodok under the Ukrainians, and the main heart of Slavyansk Arc operation Slavyansk is also under the Ukrainian control. So this is the situation by the end of this week, by the 12th of June, and starting Monday we're gonna see, I think, a very huge offensive operation by the Russians towards Slavyansk. At least they will try to blockade this north part of this town. Of course, there are a lot of many other sides where the Russian can start their offensive operation. For example, from the west, from direction of Barvenkova in this area, or from the east, from the town Nikolaevka. But for these purposes, they need to cross somewhere Seversky Donetsk river near Seversk, or maybe near Nikolaevka. We will discuss the situation later about the bombing along this river. There are a lot of bombing, a lot of shelling, and a lot of losses. But now let's try to discuss this area one more time, as deep as possible. So the Russians established control over the Sidorova, and for now they have like two ways what they can do. First of all, they can use the Sidorova bridgehead for two directions. One of them is towards Mayaki, and the second one towards the forest, and towards the forest, trying to split this area into parts, trying to clear this forest, and after that they will be able to attack. For example, if the Russians are able to establish control over this road M03 from Sidorova direction, they will be able to attack, for example, Dolina Krasnopolye from the back, and also they will be able to attack Khristishe as well. So let's discuss. I think that, of course, the Russians are going to use every single direction they can. About Dolina, Mazanevka, Krasnopolye, these areas is very important because these three villages lays right on this road M03 that leads towards Slavyansk and towards this bridgehead. But the only one problem with these towns, for example, if we compare Bogorodichne and Dolina, it's almost the same towns in the same place. But the problem is that Bogorodichne has only one way of support this town, and this road M03 that leads from Slavyansk towards Bogorodichne, and this is the only one way how the Ukrainians can support their forces in this village. But if you take a look at Dolina and Krasnopolye, you're gonna see that there is a small lake, like a group of lakes in this area, and as you can see, the Ukrainians can supply and support this area not just using this road. They also can use some west bridgehead on the west from Slavyansk, this area, and they can move their forces towards Krasnopolye, Dolina, Mazanevka, and these forces, these supply roads can be pretty safe because the Russians has possibility just to establish some fire control, but it won't be very easy for them because of big, huge area bridgehead that is still under the Ukrainians. So that's why there is like few options in this case. All the Russians are planning to rush this area, push this area, and to establish control over this town, of course, if they are able. Or first they will like keep this picture like that, trying to push and trying to touch to feel the Ukrainians' defense in this area. And that's it. Maybe there is a very high possibility that establishing control over Dolin and Krasnopolye, we're gonna see like the final step before the Slavyansk operation. Of course, the Russians, they need to establish control over this road, because like the main artery in this area, and if the Russians are planning to start some offensive operations towards Slavyansk, they need to have a stable road that will support their forces on the north from Slavyansk, because we understand that maybe in a week or maybe in 2 weeks we're gonna see that the Russians will have something like this, that like this area that leads from Raigorodok, Donetsk, Mayaki, Christiche, like the Russians' positions. And of course, if the Russians want to be successful, if their offensive operation want to be successful, of course they need to have stable road MO3, and this is the only one big road that can support and supply this bridgehead. There is some local roads, and we know that the Russians have some bridge crossing the Severodonetsk river that connected with Svetogorsk. We see that there is a very interesting and very powerful railroad station near Sosnovo. That means that the Russians are able to push some trains towards Sosnovo with heavy tanks, equipment, and everything they need. And using these local roads, they are able to support this territory, of course. And I'm sure that they're going to use this. The same situation with Liman, a very big railroad station. So that's why this station will allow them to push some forces and to push some shells, equipment towards the front line. So at least there are 3 ways. But the road is very important, because there is Izum in this area, and we know that the 20th and 35th Russian army is in this bridgehead, and of course it's like not very effective if the Russians are planning to support this offensive operation using like going back and after that moving to Svetogorsk. So I'm sure that the Russians will try, and maybe the next week we're gonna see this, but the clashes there are going to be very, very heavy. So the Russians can attack from Sidorov towards Mayaki, and from Sidorov towards the forest, clear this forest from Ukrainian commanders and scouts, and after that move to Christiche. So if we discuss these 2 operations, of course the most important one is to attack Mayaki, because if the Russians are able to establish control over Mayaki, this small village, this will allow them to establish control over this road, like fire control. There is just 3 kilometers, so we can say that using mortars, mines, and tanks, they will be able to destroy anything that moves, that uses this road towards even towards any position on this side of this forest. And the most important part, if the Russians are able to establish control over Mayaki, and they are able, first of all, because there is like a road, straight road from Sidorov towards Mayaki, and another reason why they can do this is that the bridgehead on this side of Severodonetsk river in this area is under the Russian control. So totally, so the Russians can move their forces like towards Mayaki and come to this area very close, like not just close, but they can establish some control from this coast, from this bulk of the river, and they can establish control over like the suburbs of Mayaki from this side. And you know that I will move a little bit to another front line, to this front line. We discussed this yesterday, that Ukrainians have a lot of forces, Petrovsky, Zavgorodnya, Protokopivka, and Chepil, and you know that we discussed it many times that Severodonetsk, the level of the water in this river become very low, and there is a lot of places where you can cross the river without pontoon bridges. And to tell the truth, the Russians is not the only one who use this benefit, and Ukrainians are doing the same. So they start to cross this river massively. They try to move in these forests as much forces as possible. So the Severodonetsk river is not like game changer in this conflict. It's no longer game changer. We can say that it can become a game changer just by the autumn, but for now it's not a problem for anybody. It's not a problem neither for the Russians nor the Ukrainians. So of course the Russians have very big chance to establish control over Mayaki, and as I told you, they'll be able to establish control over this road. And that means that these forests they still will be able to supply, and there are going to be a lot of clashes in these forests between commandos. We're going to see them. But most important part, if the Russians are able to establish control over Mayaki, is that they will be able to establish control as well over this road, and that they will be able to control Raigorodok Donetsk from the back. And this control will allow the Russians to start their offensive operation towards Donetsk and towards Raigorodok. And to tell the truth, this is exactly what are they doing right now. The Russians are pushing, shelling the Raigorodok and Donetsk from this side. I didn't update this map. I must say that this territory is also under the Russians entirely. There is no even a town or small village that is still controlled by the Ukrainians. No, everything here is by the Russians. So Mayaki is the key area, because from this town you can see everything on every side of this map. You can see Slavyansk, you can start shelling this, you can control this road, you can enforce any offensive operation from Liman Bridgehead towards Donetsk and Raigorodok. So the situation is vital. So we can say, and we should determine the goals for the next week, and I'm sure that Mayaki is the key area, because if the Russians are able to establish control over Mayaki, we can say that entire defense area on the north of Slavyansk will be collapsed by this movement. So that's why they will try to establish control over Mayaki as the primary goal, as the main goal. And the question if the Russians are able to do this depends on the Ukrainians. If they are able, and if they want to fight for Mayaki till the last Ukrainian, and we can say that now Mayaki is the vital questions for the Ukrainians. They need to do everything they can just with one purpose: to stop the Russians somewhere here. And they have a lot of possibilities for that, because we know and we see that this forest is still under their control. Of course, the Russians can use their a lot of people from our comments I see, they say that this forest is not a problem for the Russians, because they can use their flamethrower systems. We know this system, like Solntsepek, right, to burn this forest. But I must say that if this forest will be burned or set on fire, you need to understand that this is not it will be done not by the Russians, because if this forest will be set on fire, the Russians will be forced to stop their offensive operation. I know the weather now is very, very dry, and this forest can burn to ruins, right? Everything and it's a very old forest. Of course, there are a lot of old trees on the ground, so this forest can be burned, and the smoke and everything else can stop the Russians, and they're not interested in that. So for them to set this forest on fire is the worst case. But I'm sure that Ukrainians, if they see and understand that they're losing this battle, I'm sure that they will do this. At least they will have another week or two to prepare the Slavyansk, or like fresh, to get some fresh air in this air. Like there will be a smoke, it's not fresh, but for the Ukrainians it will be a fresh air, because the Russians won't be able to continue their offensive operation if there are going to be a fire in this area. So this is it, and this is the situation on Slavyansk bridgehead. Now let's take a look in the area between Nikolaevka, Zakitna, Serebryanka, Seversk, Bilogorovka, Shepilevka, Privilya. The Russians are bombing this area heavily. I told you many times that this is the area where the Russians are trying to establish their another front line, and they're not they're not dropping these attempts. They want to do this, and as I told you, the Severodonetsk is no longer the game changer in this area, so they can cross. There are a lot of places when they can do this, of course. If you remember, I told you that the Ukrainians moved a lot of forces towards Privili Novodruzhsk, and yesterday, as far as I remember, there was Iskander strike over Privili, and with this strike, a lot of Ukrainians were killed. They were in the buildings and so on. So the Russians are doing some artillery preparation in this area, and I think, or they just want to freeze some forces here, showing the Ukrainians that, hey, look at us, we are bombing this area, and maybe in a day or two we're gonna start their offensive operation. And these shellings force Ukrainians to keep some forces there, and of course these forces, they need them to use somewhere else, but they have to use them here. And if they move any forces from this area, of course the Russians will use this opportunity and cross the river. But for now, there are just heavy shelling along the river, and we will follow this situation. And let's talk about Severodonetsk. As you can see, I have already updated this map, and all these areas, the red areas with the blue border, is the territory that is already under the Russians' control. But according to the West Sources map, this area is still under the Ukrainians. But believe me, it's not like that. The Russians established control over entire Rubizhnoye, over Voyevodovka, over Metyolkin, Voronova, and established control over Sirotiny. The only one area is that still on the Ukrainian is Borivsky, and these territories, you can see, split in two parts. So the Ukrainians hold Borivsky, and they hold Azov plant, the only one place in Severodonetsk that is still under the Ukrainians. And about this plant Azov, one important note. There are around 600 of Ukrainian soldiers in this area. This is the most powerful elite forces. There are around 400 of elite forces and around 200 of foreign volunteers in this area. And if we're talking about Borivsky, there are just Ukrainian forces. And these guys, they can't leave this territory, because there are for many reasons, and there are so many reasons as the destroyed bridge in this area. This one is destroyed. This one is already destroyed, and it was destroyed a few weeks ago, but this one was destroyed in a day, today or maybe yesterday. The only one bridge that still exists is this one, but you can't use heavy equipment for this bridge, and as you can see, this bridge is very far from the Severodonetsk Azov plant. And as I know, the Ukrainians are holding some hostages in this area among civilians, and they try to start some negotiation with the Russian forces. It's everything according to the Russian sources, and they try to exchange the civilians for giving them opportunity to leave this plant. I don't know exactly what's going on right now. I know that the Russians are pushing, and there is some place where these civilians start to leave. Maybe they achieved some agreements between. I'm not sure, but in a day or two, I think that entire this area is going to fall. Another update about Toshkovka, Chirova area. If we take a look at the Russian sources map, they have already updated this area. As you can see, not the entire Toshkovka, this part is on the Russians, and this Chihirova area, we discussed this many times, there are very heavy clashes, like the gray zone there, the area with the fightings, and I have already marked this area. So Chihirova, I can't say that this area is still on the Ukrainians, but the Russians are doing some clear operation there. So anyway, we can say that they managed to establish control over this road. Another update about this area, Zolotoy that the Russians established control over entire Kamyshevaha, and yes, they told that they established control over this railroad Svetlanova. As I understand, there are very heavy clashes in Nikolaevka and Vrubovka, and the Russians are fighting in this town, in this area for another few weeks, like 2 weeks, and they can't proceed, they can't push Ukrainians from this area. And these towns are very fortified, and it's like a vital question for the Russians because there is a road from Gorsko-Zolotoy that leads toward the big land, and the Russians need to cut this road. So that's why, as far as I understand, the Russians move toward this town, this railroad station Svetlanova, this one, and as I found another town in this area. So I think that because of that fact that the Russians can't establish control over Mykolaiv and Vrubovka, today also another confirmation about my theory that Ukrainians announced that the Russians started their offensive operation and they achieved some success in offensive operation towards Novoivanovka. This town is Novoivanovka. So I think that the main goal and the Russians' primary goal for the beginning of the next week is to, after they establish control of Svetlanova, they will proceed towards this small railroad station, this station. There is no even title of this town. If we take a look at the Russian sources map, let's take a look. This is it. There is no even title. There is like buildings, there is some village, maybe it's like a farm, private farm, I don't know. So I think that the Russians are planning to move towards this farm, towards this area, and this will allow them to cut this road, and after that they will be able to proceed their operation in Nikolaevka and Vrubovka. Another small update is that the Russians established control entire over Dolomitne. They have updated their map with this. You see that there is red color, so before it wasn't, it was like without color and with the gray borders. That means that it's like gray zone. And the Russians established control over Vodrodzhenie, and there are very heavy clashes over the Roty. So the main idea, of course, to establish control over this plant, this if we take a look at this map, I have updated. So Vodrodzhenie is under the Russians, are fighting among in Roty, and they want to establish control over the Uglidarskaya power plant. So they want to clear this front line, and that will allow them to start some offensive operation towards Toretsk and toward the south of Bakhmut. So of course, it's not like the goal for the next week, but the main idea to cut this area into parts. So to split Toretsk and Bakhmut into pieces, and after that they will be able to handle with every single town in this area one by one. That's it about the front lines. I'd like to remind you that military summary condemned any violence on the planet, any violence, any aggression on the planet, not just in Ukraine, everywhere. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, and enjoy your weekend. Bye bye.